Thank you, Deborah, for giving me this opportunity. It's a learning environment. I will start by introducing myself. My name is Tabe. I am from Qatar. I am a safety professional, occupational health and environmental protection professional based in Qatar. I am working with Algebra Engineering. Okay, so I will be your guest for today. I hope you are going to enjoy this presentation, this webinar. Next. All right, so our topic for today is how can we use the ISO standards to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so we are going to discuss on this topic. So in actual sense, the United Nations has 17 of these Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm not going to discuss all of them, but I'm going to discuss a few of these Sustainable Development Goals and how we can use ISO management system to achieve these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. So before we delve into details, I would like to pose a question. What is sustainability? Now, according to my source, that's Wikipedia. Wikipedia defines sustainability as the ability to exist constantly. Okay, that's according to Wikipedia. The ability to exist constantly. Now, constantly means you need to subsist. You need to be available at all times. There should be no changes. Or even if there are some changes, you should be able to adapt to that or to those changes. Okay, I'm not going to details of what is sustainability, because sustainability in itself is a very broad topic. It's a very broad topic, but I just want us to have a brief definition of sustainability. Next slide, please. All right, the second question I would like to ask is, what is sustainable development? Again, my source is from Wikipedia, and according to Wikipedia, I will just paraphrase, sustainability or sustainable development can be defined as a development that meets the present generations, their needs, without without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that's how Wikipedia sees or looks at sustainable development. So the ability of present generation to meet their needs without compromising the ability of future generation meeting their own needs. So in a summary, I can say whatever activity or whatever material or whatever resources that you have at hand, you should know that there is or there will be a future generation who are going to benefit in one way or the other on that same resources. Okay, so we need to use these resources, keeping in mind that there are some other people in the future who will equally be in need of these resources. Next slide, please. All right. So our first slide is focused on using ISO 19001-2015 standards to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. Okay, so how can this ISO standard assist us or lead us into achieving this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 3? And goal number 3 here is good health and well-being. Good health and well-being. Okay, so we can look at clause 7.1.4 in the standard, in the ISO standard. Okay. So, and you should equally note that ISO 19001 has to do with quality management system. Okay. So, but now the question is, how can we relate? What is the relationship between this clause and this goal? Goal number 3, good health and well-being. Okay. Now, let me give some highlights about that, how we can relate it. If we should look at the clause says the organization should determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of product and services. Okay. Now, there is a section there. There is a particular section there. Let me not say section, but it further explains. Okay. Now, the environment must be suitable, not only for the product, but it should be suitable equally for the workers or the people who are working around, who are working in the organization. And a suitable environment can be a combination of human and physical factors. Okay? A suitable environment comprises of human and physical factors. Okay? Now, under the physical factors, we talk about the temperature, the humidity, the light, and the airflow. Okay? So, in another sense, I can say it is we are talking about HVAC. HVAC is an acronym for mechanical people, that is humidity, ventilation, and AC. All right. So, for instance, if we find ourselves in an organization where the humidity is such that you cannot get control of it, it's going to be boring, right? Consider yourself working in an office and there is no AC, or you cannot regulate the temperature by yourself. It's going to be boring. You are going to feel some stress. It's going to be stressful. And as a result of that, productivity is going to be low, and effectivity, and you are not going to be effective in carrying out your operation on a daily basis. Okay. So the other aspect of it is psychological. Psychological, I mean stress reduction, and emotional. So the working environment should be such that the people who are working in that organization or in that sector should not face this kind of unbearable situation. And all of this has to do with your health, good health, the mentality, your psychology, and all that. So I think and I believe that this clause 7.4.1.4 is highly related to this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, which is good health and well-being. When we look at the subsections or the detailed explanation. And again, there is a small box that I made here. Can you see that? There are some objects like human, like it's a human score there. And there is something like a hand, the hand of a human being. Okay, yeah, this area. So that explains, it explains this concept of good health and well-being. Can you go back? Yeah. This box here explains the concept of good health and well-being. Okay. And I would equally like to point out the fact that this particular section, or this particular clause, 7.1.4c, also has to do with lead concept. I don't know if you know about lead. Lead is leadership in energy and environmental development. Okay, that is lead. So these aspects, this very section or this very clause is also a lead concept. So it is related to well-being, because lead also has interest on good health and well-being, and they will always consider factors like indoor environmental quality. That's what I put it in bracket. IEQ, that's indoor environmental quality. So it is a lead concept. So if these factors are not convenient, if these factors are not conducive, you realize that productivity will be low, all right, productivity will be low, and efficiency will not be appropriate. Just because the human being, the human, good health and well-being is being affected. Next slide. Again, how can we use ISO 19001 requirement to achieve this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 4? Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is quality education. Okay. So we can actually see that in our standard or in our requirement in clause 7.2. If anyone has a standard, you can open it and check. You can see it also there. 7.2. Now in 7.2 actually talks about competency. Okay. It talks about competency. Competency of what? Competency of the staff or the members of the organization. They need to be competent to carry out the operational processes or whatever activity that the organization requires from them. These staff or these employees need to be competent. Okay. And competency there, how can we determine or how can we examine that someone is competent? This person should have skills, should have some educational backgrounds, should have training. Okay, so this training might be formal and informal or on-the-job training. So actually, when we look at the standard talks about training as a means of acquiring competency of these individuals or the people who are going to be employed in the organization. Okay. So if the organization or the members of the organization are not qualified, it means that we are going to be unable to meet this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, which is quality education. And of course, the standard makes it very clear that the organization should ensure that training should be carried out. The workers should be trained. And again, they need to document this information. They need to document the training as it is usually referred or generally referred in the standard, documented information. So whatever training or whatever education or whatsoever skills that a person has, it should be documented as documented information, as the standard calls it. Again, we could equally see competency in ISO 45001, almost the same, or the same clause 7.2. We talked about competency. So summarily, competency goes to fulfill this quality education. Okay. Next slide. All right. The next item. How can we use ISO 19001 requirement to fulfill the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is gender equality? Okay. So we can actually see gender equality in clause 7.1 and 0.2. Okay, 7.1.2 in the clause, in the standard. Now, this clause talks about the people. For those of us who have the standards, it talks about people. So who are these people in actual sense? Who are these people? Because it mentioned just people. But if we should go by interpretation of what people mean, we are talking about people of all walks of life, whether you are a woman, whether you are a man, okay? This is what we refer to as people. But again, these people should be competent. I'm trying to go back to the previous slide, all right? But this particular section or this particular Sustainable Development Goal number 5, it talks about gender equality. So which means there should not be any aspect of discrimination, whether you are a woman, whether you are a man, okay? All of us are equal in the field, irrespective of who you are, irrespective of your color, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of wherever you are coming from. That is all about gender equality. Now, if we should go deep into the standards, there is one section or there is one aspect concerning a positive working environment. All right. And one of those factors is about the social aspect of the environment. You remember I said a suitable working environment is a combination of human and physical. So the social factor is equally one of those factors that will affect a working environment. Okay, so now, how can this social factor affect or be related to this gender equality? All right. Of course, like I said before, it should be non-discriminatory. It should be calm. It should be non-confrontational, irrespective of your race, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of whether you are a woman or generally irrespective of your sex. Okay, so this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is gender equality, we can relate it to clause 7.1 and 0.2, which talks about people. So I believe applying this clause, we are going to be able to achieve this sustainable development goal. Most especially looking at, the social factor that will affect a suitable working environment, which is non-discriminatory and non-confrontational. Okay. Next slide, please. Next sustainable development goal is goal number 9, which talks about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. All right. So the applicable clause in our standard is clause 7.1.3. If you have your standard, you can refer it, 7.1.3. So this clause talks about infrastructure. Okay, the clause talks about infrastructure. Now, what does the clause say? It says the organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the infrastructure necessary for the operation of its processes to achieve conformity of product and services. All right, the clause makes it very clear, absolutely clear. You need to provide, you need to maintain infrastructure necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of product and services. Of course, it is but normal. Without infrastructure, you cannot carry out your operational activities, isn't it? Without infrastructure, you cannot carry out these operational activities. So, going back to the clause, infrastructure includes buildings, buildings and associated utilities. The associated utilities in building will comprise maybe telephones, drinking water, potable water, toilet, and all that. Okay. Equipment, including hardware and software, and transportation resources, information and communication technology. So these are the items, or these are the elements that form infrastructure. Of course, it is very practical. The organization or an organization cannot or may not function properly without these items or without these elements. It cannot function without the infrastructure. Just like we say, the organization cannot equally function without the environment. The organization does not exist in the air. Of course, air or the atmosphere is equally part of the environment. Right? So you can see that this clause can help achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, clause goal number 9, which is in industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Next slide. In the quality management system, on how we can support or how we can use it to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. So now we are going to discuss about ISO 14001 and how we can use it or how it can help us to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Goal number 6, which is clean water and sanitation. Okay, clean water and sanitation. So we can align it with clause 5.2. Clause 5.2. Okay. And here in this clause 5.2 actually has to do with environmental management system policy. Okay, that is environmental policy. All right. So in this clause, it is mandatory or it is obligatory for the management system or for the management to express commitment in protecting the environment. So they have to develop a policy, thereby expressing their intention, okay, towards protecting, or commitment, not intention, commitment towards protecting the environment. And protecting the environment, we cannot avoid so many things. For example, pollution. Okay, that is a typical example in the clause. So they have to be committed in protecting the environment, pollution inclusive. Okay, so if in a situation where, for example, let's take an example of a manufacturing or a chemical manufacturing. Where do they discharge their waste, the waste chemicals? How do they discharge? How do they treat it? How do they handle it? Are they releasing to land? Are they releasing to the ocean or to water? How are they treating it? How are they handling it? Okay, so management has to express commitment, okay, towards protecting the environment and most especially pollution. Because like the way, like we always, like we say, what goes around comes back around. So we should remember that whatsoever you are discharging or whatsoever you are releasing to land or whatsoever you are releasing to water is going to come back. It's like a circle. So it's more about clean water and sanitation. So the next slide on that of ISO 14001. How will ISO 14001 help achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 7? That is affordable and clean energy. Okay, affordable and clean energy. So we can relate this goal to clause 6.1.2 of our standard. 6.1.2 of our standards. Okay. So this 6.1.2 actually talks about, determining environmental aspects. How does the organization, or how the organization determines its environmental aspects? And how are these, or how is it going to affect the environment, or how is it going to create an impact on the environment? So they need to carry out, environmental aspect assessment. Okay, they need to carry out environmental aspect assessment. So they need to equally determine the significance. How significant are they? They need to determine the significance of this environmental aspect. Okay, so if at the end of the day they should come out with significant environmental aspects, they need to determine, or they need to take into consideration emission to the air, release to water, and release to land, and the use of energy. How is it going to affect this? How is it going to impact this need? How is it going to impact the need for affordable and clean energy? So working alongside clause 6.1 and 0.2 is going to enable us achieve affordable and clean energy. That is after taking into consideration environmental aspects. Here, so the next slide. Okay, the next slide is how we are going to use ISO 14001 to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which is climate action. Okay, climate action. So the applicable clause in our standard is clause 9.1.2. Okay, 9.1.2. So 9.1.2 has to do with evaluation of compliance, or compliance evaluation. That's what the clause is all about. So actually, climate action, as per the United Nations, is moving, or is working towards climate change. What are those activities that will cause, or that will impact the climate? Okay, so given that most industries, or most very huge industries or factories, they are emitting toxic substances into the atmosphere, which are going to affect, or which are going to impact the climate. Okay, so these organizations, they have to be in compliance with certain requirements. They need to be in compliance with certain requirements, like the climate change. We have so many summits. We have so many summits nowadays, which member states have to rectify, and they need to implement. So it is equally the same thing on individual organizations, who have to make sure they work in compliance with the requirements which are meant to protect the climate, which are meant to protect the climate. So how will the organization ensure that they are working towards fulfilling this obligation? They have to carry out evaluation, compliance evaluation. And if they are carrying out compliance evaluation, it means that they are working positively towards fulfilling this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. which is aimed at protecting the climate. Okay. Next slide. All right. The next one is how are we going to use ISO 14001 in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 13 and number 12, sorry. Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Okay. So we can look at our clause 9.1.1 and 9.1.1c and clause 10.1, clause 7.4, and also look at the clauses provided in the quality management system. Okay, that's clause 8.1. Okay, clause 8.1. So how can we relate these clauses towards achieving this sustainable development goal? That is the question. Okay, so the first clause is clause 9.1.1 and 9.1.1c, which talks about performance evaluation and improvements. Okay, so it is an obligation, or it is something required on every organization to carry out performance evaluation and measurement. So if the organization is able to carry out this performance evaluation based on their activities or on their processes, okay, at the same time, they will be in one way or the other fulfilling or meeting this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Okay. Also in clause 10.1, which talks about opportunities for improvement. Okay, opportunities for improvement. The organization has to come out with, they need to understand that whatsoever operational activities that they are carrying out, there are some risks and opportunities. So they should dwell more on these opportunities and to make sure they will carry out improvement in order to fulfill the standards or the requirements. Again, in clause 7.4, which talks about communication of environmental performance. So the organization needs to communicate this environmental performance. They don't need to conduct the environmental performance and keep it. They don't need to keep it in their shelf or wherever. Okay, they need to communicate it. They need to communicate it to stakeholders, to interested parties. They need to make it known to them. They need to communicate it. So that aspect of communicating, that aspect of sharing goes a long way to fulfill this or to meet this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Okay. Next slide. So how are we going to use ISO 14001 to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 14 and 15? So 14 and 15, they talk about life below water and life on land. I guess so. It's clear. Can you see it properly? Life below water and life on land.
Yes.
Yeah. So how are we going to use this management system or standards to fulfill or to meet this Sustainable Development Goal number 14 and 15? So we can look at it from clause 9, which talks about the organization can carry out measurement or to measure performance. Okay, they can strive towards measurement, performance measurement, and striving for improvement, which is clause 10. Okay, so again, looking at their activities or looking at their operational activities, what could be the impact, or what is the impact on these operations on land or on water? Okay, how do they handle their waste products? How do they handle their waste product? How do they carry out waste management? Do they outsource or do they handle it themselves? Where do they dispose of this waste product or waste toxic substances? Okay, so looking at clause 9 is going to help us fulfill these two sustainable development goals, 14 and 15. Also in clause 10, which talks about improvement. So the organization have the opportunity to carry out improvement after carrying out evaluation or measurement. Okay, and also clause 10, clause 8, okay, which is about operation. Clause 8 talks about operation. Okay, so these three clauses, clause 9, 10, and 8, they are going to help us to fulfill or to meet this United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 14 and 15. So I think so far so good. That is a little I could bring in. That's a little.